trends at the paper there, and prior to that I was in journalism school at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Right. So I've moved from being a reporter to being an editor to now mostly doing a lot of the fundraising and administration and that kind of work to really keep the reporter going, since we're a nonprofit investigative publication. So we need to raise funds to keep going.
So for people who may not be familiar, what's the aim of the reporter? Like, what is the objective of the magazine?
Yeah, well, the Reporter's been around for about 33 years, and our mission has always been to focus on issues of race and poverty, to really use data and research and a lot of facts and investigative work to really show people how those issues are still playing out in a lot of the institutions and among public officials. You know, that I think there's a way today that people want to kind of sweep these things under the rug, or say that, well, if you just work hard now, anybody can make it. And the data shows different. Right. The data shows different, that there's still a lot of disparities. And so we try to combine that with really the stories and the voices of people really being affected by these issues.
Certainly, certainly. What are some of the stories that you guys have done within the past year that you think reflect some of the things that you're talking about?
Well, let me give a couple of examples. We did a series over the past year in 2005 on money. This was through a partnership called Chicago Matters that we do with public radio, public television, and the library. It's sponsored by the Chicago Community Trust. And a couple of the stories we did that I'll highlight are really telling. We did an investigation into mortgage data, mortgage lending data, which you can get, which is made publicly available, partly to guard against discrimination. But we found that black people in Chicago still just have a 50-50 chance of getting approved for a mortgage. And that if you're black and you make, well, but it doesn't bode well, considering that people think that redlining is over. Right. And if you're black and you make $90,000 a year, you have less chance of being approved than if you're white and you make $30,000 a year. And everybody, regardless of race, has a harder time getting approved for mortgages in black neighborhoods. That those are the hardest neighborhoods to get mortgages for. So that was really telling. And another story we did at the tail end of 2005, which people are still talking about, is a study of retailers. We looked at about 1,000 major retailers in the Chicago area and discovered that, in mostly black neighborhoods, people do, I think it was 2/3 of their shopping outside of the community. And so there's tremendous, the term is leakage. There's tremendous leakage in black communities where we're not investing close to home because many of the communities we live in do not have the services and businesses we want. And so that raises a lot of questions about economic development and what's keeping retailers out, because obviously, there's money to be spent. So those are a couple examples of some of the stories we've done recently.
When you look at media these days, in modern media, print, broadcast, what do you generally think? I know that's a very open-ended general question, but what's your basic sentiment in the modern media?
Well, basically, it is it's corrupt.
Why so?
For lack of a better word. When you look at modern mainstream media, it does not cover key and important issues in a timely fashion. It doesn't do it in an in-depth fashion. It's really a bunch of entertainment, and people tease me sometimes and say, you're not really the only fake publication out here. When you look at the fact that the White House was feeding false news, or we should say fake news. They were using reporters who weren't really reporters. They were PR people, and submitting this video news releases all over the country. And news stations were picking it up and using it as if it was actual news. They're doing it also in Iraq right now. When you look at the fact that you have people who were writing false articles. I mean, they were just making stuff up, putting it out there. So, there's a lot of problems in the media, and really, even when you get beyond the White House feeding news, when you get beyond even the fake made-up stories that some even won Pulitzer Prize in the past 10 years, what you have is just these huge monopolies, basically, you know, who are owning media outlets all across the country. They're in print, they're in TV, they're in radio, and they're just streamlining news so that you don't really get in-depth local news that really helps, you know, people improve their lives.
Right.
Now, with all this type of information, like a story, a situation like this, where this has the potential to affect everyone, why is it that stories like that don't reach people as often?
Thank you. That's the best question you could have asked, okay? Thank you, my dear. One, because the media is now consolidating, had been consolidating for a long, long time. And the media today is probably, the corporate press today is owned by, approximately, I'm not going to count for sure, but approximately 6 major multi-owners. Major. And these major multi-owners have their own agenda, which has nothing to do with exposing truth. God forbid we should tell the truth. Okay? So they give us, have you ever sat down? I would love to get a class of kids together and just study media for a month. This group will study Channel 7. This group will do Channel 5. This group will Channel 2. And talk about what's going on in the 6 o'clock news, in the 4 o'clock news, in the 10 o'clock news. 90% of it, and I just made that up, but a good percent of it is garbage, trivia, and infomercials. Okay? So they slug something into the slot, and it looks like they're telling the truth, but in truth they're not telling any truth, and they're really promoting a new restaurant, a new piece of something good to eat, or a new, I love this one, or a new drug for a disease we didn't know we had.
Right.
Okay? God forbid I should have some horrible new disease. And I've got to take that drug for it. And I'm going to run to my doctor. And my doctor is going to be overwhelmed by my insistence because they said it on television. So we're now talking about profit, hon. We're talking about profit motive, and we're talking about the need for these corporations not to bring people to the polling place, but to bring people to the marketplace.
Maybe 13 years ago, you may have had 20, 30, maybe 40 different big companies who owned a lot of the media outlets. You had still some independent publications, local news, weekly publications, radio stations. But in the past 13 years, things have really gotten to the point where they're like 5 to 6 outlets who really own almost all of your news outlets, whether it's weekly publications, daily publications, radio stations. I mean, you can even talk about the billboards. They own a lot of the billboards.
Definitely.
So, man, it's really just intensifying.
I try to remind people the media is just another institution like any institution in society, and right now, like most other institutions in society, it's a largely profit-driven enterprise. So it's going to be focused on the bottom line to some degree. Now, I also remind people that journalists are just people. We are not evil beings that are looking to control the world. So, try to keep that in mind. But I also think you have to distinguish a little bit between print news and broadcast news. Broadcast news has got to be much flashier, sexier, sort of that if it bleeds, it leads kind of attitude, because that's all about ratings. And many broadcast journalists I know have talked about the fact that it's so frustrating because it's gotten so much harder to get the time required to really do a balanced story, to really do some of those things that aren't necessarily the tragedy of the day. There's just less and less time because partly the public wants 24-hour news now. So you've got people really working around the clock on just, the major events. Now, and I will tell you, with print, I think we see daily newspapers are really struggling to keep readers, and so they're trying all kinds of things aimed at mostly your demographic. I mean, I'm kind of moving out of the demographic they want to some degree, but mostly your demographic because, you all don't read daily newspapers. And they see those readership figures going down, so they're trying like, well, let's make the paper smaller, and let's have more pictures, and let's do more entertainment, and those kinds of things aimed at attracting younger people. Now, I happen to believe that younger people do want news and information